The grand hall of the Alpha King's residence had been transformed for the diplomatic ball, an annual event that brought together representatives from every pack in the territories to discuss treaties, resolve disputes, and maintain the fragile peace that prevented open warfare. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across polished marble floors. Tables laden with food and wine lined the walls, and 300 guests in formal attire mingled and danced and negotiated, conducting politics under the guise of celebration. Lyra stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens, trying to calm her nerves. She was 23 years old, and this was her first time representing her pack at such a significant event. Clearwater was a small, neutral territory that survived by maintaining good relations with all neighboring packs, never taking sides in conflicts, never making enemies. Her alpha had sent her as delegate with clear instructions. Be polite, be diplomatic, make no commitments that could compromise their neutrality, and above all, avoid causing any incidents that might draw unwanted attention. The journey to the Alpha King's residence had taken 3 days, traveling by carriage through territories that grew progressively more prosperous the closer she got to the capital. Lyra had never been this far from home, had never seen buildings so grand or wolves dressed so elegantly. Her own dress, while the finest Clearwater could provide, felt plain compared to the silken jewels adorning the noble ladies who filled the ballroom. She had spent the afternoon before the ball being briefed by Clearwater's senior advisor on which alphas to approach, which topics to avoid, and how to navigate conversations that could easily become political minefields. Remember, you are representing not just yourself, but the entire pack, the advisor had said. Every word you speak reflects on Clearwater's neutrality. Be careful not to agree with criticisms of any alpha, even if they seem reasonable. Be careful not to appear too friendly with any particular faction. Your job is to be present, polite, and completely unremarkable. Unremarkable. That was what Lyra had been trying to achieve all evening. She had exchanged pleasantries with several delegates, had carefully deflected attempts to draw her into discussions about territorial disputes, had accepted compliments on her dress with gracious thanks that committed her to nothing. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance about every word and gesture, but it was necessary for a small pack that could not afford to make powerful enemies. The ballroom itself was overwhelming in its grandeur. The ceiling soared 30 feet above the dance floor, painted with murals depicting wolf history and mythology. The chandeliers were works of art, crystal and gold, that must have cost more than Clearwater's entire annual budget. Even the food was extravagant. Delicacies Lyra had never seen before, wines from regions she could not pronounce, desserts sculpted into shapes so elaborate they seemed too beautiful to eat. She had been standing by the window for perhaps 20 minutes, taking a brief respite from diplomatic small talk, when the crowd near the main entrance stirred. Lyra turned to see what had caused the reaction, and found herself looking directly at Alpha King Theron for the first time. She had been managing well enough until Alpha King Theron had arrived. Lyra had seen him from across the crowded hall, had felt something snap into place the moment their eyes met. A pull so intense it had nearly driven her to her knees. The mate bond. She had heard about it her entire life, had been told it was unmistakable when it activated, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Every instinct screamed at her to go to him, to claim him, to make it known that destiny had chosen them for each other. But Theron had looked away almost immediately, had turned his attention to the visiting alphas demanding his time, and Lyra had been left standing by the window, trying to understand why her mate had felt the bond. She was certain he had felt it, had seen recognition in his eyes, and deliberately chosen to ignore it. Perhaps he did not want a mate from such a small, insignificant pack. Perhaps he had political commitments that made acknowledging the bond inconvenient. Perhaps he simply did not want her, and destiny's choice meant nothing in the face of his preferences. Lyra tried not to let the rejection sting, tried to focus on her diplomatic responsibilities, but the bond hummed constantly in her chest, pulling her attention to wherever Theron stood in the crowded hall. What Lyra did not know, what she could not know, was that Theron had felt the mate bond with the same devastating intensity. He had looked across the hall, had seen the small Omega from Clearwater, and had known instantly that she was his. Every instinct demanded he go to her immediately, claim her publicly, make it clear to every wolf present that she belonged to him. But Theron had learned long ago that instinct was not always compatible with duty, and claiming his mate in the middle of a diplomatic ball would create complications he was not yet prepared to handle. Clearwater's neutrality made them valuable as mediators, but also made them vulnerable. If Theron claimed their delegate as his mate, other packs might see it as Clearwater abandoning neutrality, might interpret the bond as political alliance rather than destiny. That could destroy the careful balance Clearwater maintained, could make them targets for packs who resented their neutral position. And Theron could not do that to her, could not make her pack suffer, because destiny had chosen them for each other. So he had looked away, had forced himself to ignore the bond pulling at him, had decided he would approach her privately later, would explain the situation, would give her time to decide if accepting him was worth the political complications it would create. It was the rational choice, the responsible choice. But rational choices became much harder when rivals got involved. Alpha King of the Ironwood Pack was Theron's oldest and most persistent rival. Their territories bordered each other, and for the past decade they had been in constant conflict over boundary disputes, resource allocation, and a dozen other issues that neither was willing to compromise on. They maintained a facade of civility at diplomatic functions, but everyone knew the peace between them was fragile at best. Cade was dangerous not because he was stronger than other alphas, though he was formidable, but because he was calculating. He watched for weaknesses, exploited them ruthlessly, and never made a move without considering how it would benefit him politically. And tonight, watching Theron carefully avoid the small Omega from Clearwater while the scent of fresh mate bond hung obviously in the air, Cade recognized an opportunity too perfect to pass up. He approached Lyra with the practiced charm of someone who had spent years navigating political functions. "You look isolated over here by the window. Would you care to dance? I am Alpha King of Ironwood, and I believe we have not been formally introduced." Lyra recognized the name. Ironwood was one of the more powerful packs, and Cade's reputation as a skilled negotiator and dangerous opponent was well known. But she saw no reason to refuse a polite invitation to dance. This was a diplomatic ball. Dancing with other delegates was expected, was part of maintaining the social connections that kept peace between territories. "I am Lyra, representing Clearwater," she said, accepting his offered hand. "I would be happy to dance with you, Alpha King." She did not see the predatory smile that crossed Cade's face as he led her to the dance floor. She did not notice the way his eyes sought out Theron across the hall, making certain the Alpha King was watching. And she did not understand that she had just become a pawn in a much larger game between rivals who had been looking for an excuse to escalate their conflict for years. Across the hall, Theron watched Cade take his mate's hand and lead her to the dance floor, and something primal and furious rose in his chest. His wolf snarled, demanding he intervene immediately, that he stop this before it went any further. But Theron forced himself to remain still, forced himself to remember that Lyra did not know Cade was his enemy, did not understand the significance of accepting that dance. She was being diplomatic, being polite, exactly as her role required. Interrupting would create a scene, would reveal the mate bond publicly in exactly the way he had been trying to avoid. But watching them together, watching Cade's hand settle possessively on Lyra's waist, watching them move to the music, watching his rival smile down at his mate with clear calculation, was testing Theron's control in ways nothing else had. His hands clenched into fists, his wolf pressed against his skin, wanting to shift, wanting to tear Cade apart for daring to touch what belonged to him. "You look like you are about to start a war," murmured Marcus, Theron's beta, who had moved to stand beside him. "That is your mate dancing with Cade, is it not? I can smell the bond from here." "I am aware," Theron said through clenched teeth. "Then why are you standing here instead of claiming her?" Because claiming her creates political complications for her pack. Because I was trying to be responsible and give her time to decide if accepting me is worth those complications. Because rushing to claim her in the middle of a diplomatic function seemed like it would create more problems than it solved. And yet Cade claiming a dance with her. That is creating problems, Marcus observed. Look at how he is holding her, how he is deliberately positioning himself so you have a clear view. He knows she is your mate, Theron. He recognized the bond, and he is provoking you deliberately. Theron knew Marcus was right. Cade's smile was too satisfied, his movements too calculated. This was not a simple dance between delegates. This was a challenge, a deliberate provocation designed to make Theron lose control publicly. And the worst part was that it was working. Every second that Cade held his mate, every moment that passed without Theron intervening, made his wolf more agitated, made his control more precarious. On the dance floor, Lyra was beginning to realize something was wrong. Cade was an excellent dancer, smooth and confident, but there was something about the way he held her that felt less like diplomacy and more like a statement. And he kept glancing across the hall toward where Alpha King Theron stood watching, with an expression that Lyra could only describe as murderous. "You dance well," Cade said, his voice pleasant, but his eyes calculating. "Better than I expected from someone representing such a small pack. Clearwater rarely sends delegates to events of this magnitude. You must be honored to be chosen." "I am grateful for the opportunity," Lyra said carefully, recognizing that his compliment was also a subtle reminder of her pack's insignificance. Clearwater values maintaining good relationships with all territories. "Neutrality," Cade said, as if tasting the word. "A useful position when you lack the strength to take sides. Tell me, Lyra, do you ever wish your pack had the power to pursue its own interests, rather than simply trying not to offend anyone?" It was a trap disguised as casual conversation. If she agreed, she was criticizing her own alpha's strategy. If she disagreed too strongly, she was being defensive in a way that suggested his assessment was accurate. Lyra chose the diplomatic middle ground. "Every pack pursues its interests in the way that best suits their circumstances," she said. "Clearwater's strength lies in our relationships, not our military power. That is not weakness. It is strategy." Spoken like a true diplomat, Cade said, and Lyra could not tell if he was impressed or mocking her. But strategy only works until someone decides those relationships are worth less than what they can take from you by force. Neutrality assumes everyone will respect it. History suggests that assumption is often wrong. The conversation was making Lyra increasingly uncomfortable. There was subtext she was not quite grasping. Warnings embedded in words that seemed on the surface to be about politics, but felt more personal. And Cade's attention kept drifting to where Theron stood, as if monitoring the Alpha King's reaction was more important than the actual dance. Across the room, other guests were beginning to notice the tension. Marcus, Theron's beta, moved closer to his Alpha, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. Several of the more observant Alphas had stopped their own conversations to watch, recognizing that something significant was happening, even if they did not yet understand what. And the wolves nearest to Theron were giving him a wide berth, their instincts warning them that the Alpha King was barely maintaining control. "I wonder," Cade continued, his tone conversational but his words sharp, "if the Alpha King has shared his thoughts on your presence here tonight. He seems quite interested in our dance. Perhaps he objects to a rival showing attention to Clearwater's representative. Or perhaps his interest is more personal. Tell me, Lyra, has Theron approached you this evening? Have you had the honor of speaking with him directly?" "I have not," Lyra admitted, confusion growing. "We have not been introduced. I assume he has been occupied with more important guests." "More important?" Cade repeated, his smile suggesting he knew something she did not. "Yes, I suppose that is one interpretation." Though I would have thought your first time attending such an event would warrant at least a greeting from the host. It is strange that he would ignore you so completely, especially given, but perhaps I am reading too much into the situation. Reading too much into what situation? Lyra asked, her diplomatic training warring with her desire to understand what was actually happening. You are friends with Alpha King Theron? Lyra asked carefully, trying to understand the dynamics she was clearly missing. Friends is not the word I would use, Cade said, his smile sharp. We are rivals, have been for years, territory disputes, political disagreements, the usual conflicts between powerful packs, but tonight I think I may have found a new way to gain advantage. I do not understand, Lyra said, unease growing. What does dancing with me have to do with your rivalry? You do not know? Cade asked, his surprise apparently genuine. You have not figured it out yet? The way the Alpha King has been watching you all evening, the way he looked ready to cross the hall the moment you arrived, the scent of mate bond that is obvious to anyone with decent senses. You are his mate, Lyra. And I am dancing with you specifically to provoke him, to make him lose control in front of every important alpha in the territories. When he inevitably storms over here to claim you, when he makes a scene that demonstrates he cannot control his instincts, even at a diplomatic function, I will have exactly the leverage I need to challenge his authority. Lyra stopped dancing, her mind reeling. Mate bond. Theron had felt it too. He had known, and he had deliberately avoided her all evening, and now she was being used as a pawn in some political game she did not fully understand. That is manipulative and cruel, she said quietly. To both of us. That is politics, Cade corrected. And in about 30 seconds, it is going to be extremely effective politics, because your mate is heading this direction and he looks ready to kill me. Theron had lost the battle with his control. Watching Cade dance with Lyra, seeing the moment she stopped moving, and clearly began to understand what was happening, knowing his rival was using his mate to provoke him. It was too much. His wolf would not tolerate it for another second. His instincts demanded action, regardless of political consequences. And Theron, who had spent years learning to balance duty with desire, found that some things could not be controlled through will alone. He crossed the dance floor with purposeful strides that made other dancers scramble to clear a path. The conversations around the hall died as wolves recognized what was about to happen and stopped to watch. By the time Theron reached Cade and Lyra, the entire ball had gone silent, 300 guests watching to see how this would play out. Remove your hands from her, Theron said, his voice carrying alpha authority that made even Cade's wolf instinctively submit slightly. Now. We are simply dancing, Cade said, his smile infuriating in its casualness. Surely the Alpha King does not object to guests dancing at his ball. That would be remarkably inhospitable. You are not dancing, Theron corrected. You are deliberately provoking me by touching my mate. And you will remove your hands from her now, or I will remove them for you, and I will not be gentle about it. The claim, spoken aloud in front of hundreds of witnesses, sent shockwaves through the assembled guests. Murmurs erupted. Alphas exchanged glances. And Lyra stood frozen, caught between the two rivals, finally understanding the full scope of what she had walked into. Cade released her, stepping back with his hands raised in mock surrender. Your mate? I had no idea. She accepted my invitation to dance freely. I assumed she was unattached. My apologies for the confusion. You are lying, Theron said flatly. You knew exactly what you were doing. You recognized the mate bond and approached her specifically to provoke me. Do not pretend this was innocent confusion. Can you prove that? Cade asked, his smile sharpening. Because from where these witnesses stand, it looks like I asked a fellow delegate to dance. She accepted politely, and you stormed onto the dance floor to claim her possessively without her prior knowledge or consent. That is not how civilized alphas treat their mates, Theron. That is how unstable, controlling wolves behave. Perhaps you are not as fit to lead as everyone assumes. The insult was calculated to push Theron further, to make him lose control completely, and it nearly worked. Theron's wolf surged, pushing him dangerously close to shifting, claws extending slightly, canines lengthening. Every instinct screamed at him to answer the challenge physically, to prove dominance the way wolves had for millennia. But before he could move, Lyra stepped between them. "Stop," she said firmly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent hall. "Both of you. I am not a prize to be fought over. I am not a tool to be used for political advantage. I am a delegate representing my pack, and I deserve to be treated with more respect than either of you are currently showing me." She turned to Cade first. "You knew I was the Alpha King's mate when you asked me to dance. You deliberately used me to provoke him, with no regard for how that would affect me or my pack. That is dishonorable and manipulative, and I want nothing further to do with you." Then she turned to Theron. "And you? You felt the mate bond and chose to ignore it all evening. You made no attempt to approach me, to introduce yourself, to explain the situation. Instead, you watched me from across the hall like I was something you were uncertain you wanted to claim. And then, the moment another alpha showed interest, you stormed over here to publicly declare I am yours without ever asking if I wanted to be claimed. That is possessive and controlling, and I do not appreciate it." She took a breath, addressing the room at large. "I am going to leave now, because I came here to represent my pack diplomatically, and this situation has become impossible to navigate appropriately. Alpha Cade, stay away from me. Alpha King Theron, if you want to discuss the mate bond, you can approach me privately like a civilized person rather than storming dance floors and making public claims. Good evening to you both." She walked away, leaving the hall in stunned silence, leaving Theron standing on the dance floor feeling like he had been gutted, leaving Cade looking satisfied despite technically losing the confrontation. And every alpha present had just witnessed the Alpha King's mate reject him publicly, which would fuel political gossip for months. Theron found Lyra in the garden an hour later, sitting on a stone bench beneath trees strung with lights, her formal dress trailing in grass, still damp from earlier rain. She had been crying. He could see the tear tracks on her face, but she met his gaze steadily when he approached. "I am sorry," Theron said, sitting on the bench with careful distance between them. "You were right about everything you said in there. I felt the mate bond the moment I saw you, and I should have come to you immediately. Instead, I made excuses about political complications and gave Cade the opportunity to use you as a pawn. That was my failure, not yours. And then I made it worse by claiming you publicly without your consent, without explanation, in a way that put you in an impossible position. You deserved better than that." Lyra was quiet for a moment, clearly processing his apology. "Why did you ignore the bond? If you felt it as strongly as I did, why would you avoid me all evening?" "Because claiming you creates political complications for your pack," Theron admitted. "Clearwater is neutral. Your strength is that you maintain good relations with everyone, never taking sides. If I claim you as mate, other packs might see that as Clearwater allying with me, abandoning neutrality. That could make your pack vulnerable to attacks or pressure from packs who resent my authority. I was trying to protect you and your pack by giving you time to decide if accepting me was worth those complications." "That should have been my choice," Lyra said. "You should have explained the situation and let me decide, not made the decision for me by avoiding me. I spent all evening thinking you felt the bond and rejected me, that I was inadequate or unwanted. That hurt more than any political complication possibly could." She took a shaking breath, the emotions she had been controlling all evening finally breaking through. "Do you understand how that felt? To walk into that ballroom already terrified that I would embarrass my pack, already feeling completely out of place among all those nobles and powerful alphas, and then to feel the mate bond snap into place with you, the Alpha King himself. And feel this overwhelming certainty that I had found something precious, and then to watch you look at me and deliberately turn away, to spend hours feeling that bond pulling at me while you treated me like I did not exist. I thought I was being responsible, Theron said quietly, pain evident in his voice. I thought giving you time and space to make the decision without pressure was the right thing to do. But you are right. I was making the decision for you by avoiding you. I was deciding that protecting you from political complications was more important than giving you the truth and trusting you to handle it. That was arrogant and controlling, even if my intentions were good. And then Cade, Lyra continued, her voice breaking slightly. He was so smooth, so charming when he asked me to dance. I thought I was doing the diplomatic thing, the polite thing. I had no idea I was being used as a pawn in your rivalry. I had no idea that accepting his dance would lead to you storming the floor and claiming me in front of everyone like I was property to be contested over. I lost control, Theron admitted. Watching him hold you, knowing he was touching you specifically to provoke me, knowing he was using you to make me look weak. My wolf could not tolerate it. Every instinct demanded I stop it immediately, regardless of consequences. And I failed to consider that claiming you publicly without warning would put you in an impossible position, would make you the center of a scene you never asked to be part of. I wanted to meet my mate, Lyra said, tears finally spilling over. I wanted it to be romantic and special and right. Instead, it was political maneuvering and public spectacle and being caught between two rival alphas, using me as a weapon against each other. That is not how I imagined this moment. Theron moved closer, carefully, giving her space to refuse if she wanted it. I cannot give you the romantic first meeting you deserved. I cannot undo the mistakes I made tonight. But I can promise that everything after tonight will be better. I can promise to include you in decisions, to respect your choices, to never again treat you as a political complication to be managed, rather than as a person I want to know and love. Can that be enough? You are not inadequate, Theron said fiercely. You are perfect. You are my mate, chosen by destiny, and there is no political complication significant enough to change that. I was trying to be responsible, but all I did was hurt you and give Cade an opening to manipulate the situation. I am sorry. I should have trusted you to make your own decision, rather than trying to protect you by avoiding you. Cade told me you are rivals, Lyra said. He said he asked me to dance specifically to provoke you, to make you lose control publicly so he could use it against you politically. Is that true? Yes, Theron confirmed. Cade and I have been rivals for years. We maintain civility at events like this, but beneath that, we are constantly looking for advantages over each other. He saw the mate bond, recognized that I was avoiding claiming you, and used that to provoke me into exactly the kind of public scene that makes me look unstable and controlling. And it worked. I played right into his strategy. So both of you used me, Lyra said, though her tone suggested she was stating fact rather than accusing. He used me as a pawn to provoke you. You avoided me to protect your reputation and my pack's political position. Neither of you treated me like a person who deserved to make my own choices. Theron could not argue with that assessment. She was right. In trying to navigate politics and respond to provocation, both he and Cade had treated Lyra as a game piece rather than as the autonomous person she was. You are right, he said quietly, and I cannot undo what happened tonight. But I can promise to do better going forward. If you choose to accept the mate bond, and that is entirely your choice, Lyra, no pressure or expectation, I promise to treat you as an equal partner. I promise to discuss decisions that affect you, rather than making them unilaterally. I promise to never again prioritize politics over honest communication with you. And if you choose to reject the bond, I will accept that decision and ensure Cade faces consequences for using you the way he did tonight. Lyra studied him in the dim garden light, clearly weighing his words against his actions. The mate bond is not something that can be rejected easily. It is already there, pulling at me constantly, making it hard to think clearly about anything except you. But I need to know that you want me for me, not just because destiny chose us. I need to know that you will respect my choices even when they complicate your politics. Can you promise me that? I can promise to try, Theron said honestly. I am Alpha King. Politics are unavoidable, and sometimes my responsibilities will conflict with what I want personally. But I can promise that I will never again avoid you or hide the bond to make politics easier. I can promise that I will include you in decisions that affect both of us. And I can promise that I want you, not because of politics, not because of duty, but because you are my mate and the person destiny chose for me, and I cannot imagine wanting anyone else. What about the scene in the ballroom? Lyra asked. Every alpha in the territories saw you lose control. Cade was right that it makes you look unstable. How do you handle that politically? I address it directly, Theron said. Tomorrow I will send communications to every pack explaining what happened, that Cade deliberately provoked me by manipulating my newly discovered mate, that my response was protective rather than unstable, and that any alpha who found themselves in the same situation would have responded similarly. Some will accept that explanation, others will use it against me anyway. But that is politics. There is always someone looking for ammunition. What matters more is that I do not give them additional ammunition by continuing to handle this poorly. And Cade? Lyra asked. What happens to him? That depends partly on you, Theron said. He used you as a tool to attack me. That warrants consequences. But the nature of those consequences, whether they are political, social, or something more direct, should be decided in consultation with you, since you were the one he harmed most directly. Lyra considered this. I do not want war. I do not want my pack caught in the middle of your rivalry becoming violent. But I do want acknowledgement that what he did was wrong. I want him to face social consequences for manipulating someone under the guise of diplomacy. That can be arranged, Theron assured her. Cade's manipulation of you will be made public. Other packs will know he used a mate bond for political advantage, which violates several codes of honorable conduct. His reputation will suffer. And Clearwater's neutrality will be explicitly protected in any communications I send, making it clear that your pack is not involved in my rivalry with Cade and should not be treated as allied with either of us. The political discussion seemed to calm Lyra, seemed to demonstrate that Theron was taking her concerns seriously and including her in decisions that affected her. She moved slightly closer to him on the bench, and Theron felt hope rising that perhaps this night could still end with his mate accepting him, rather than rejecting him. I am still angry with you, Lyra said, for ignoring me all evening, for claiming me publicly without warning, for making me feel inadequate when all I wanted was to meet my mate. That is fair, Theron acknowledged. I cannot undo those mistakes. But I can promise to spend whatever time it takes earning back your trust and proving that I will do better. The mate bond makes it hard to stay angry, Lyra admitted. Every instinct is telling me to forgive you, to accept you, to just let this go and be with you. But I do not want to make a decision based entirely on instinct when I am still upset about how tonight happened. Then do not decide tonight, Theron suggested. The bond is not going anywhere. We have time. Take whatever time you need to process what happened and decide what you want. I will wait, and I will prove through my actions that I meant what I promised. They sat in the garden for another hour, talking through the evening's events, discussing the political ramifications, slowly rebuilding the connection that Theron's avoidance and Cade's manipulation had damaged. And when Lyra finally stood to return to her quarters, when Theron walked her to her door and said goodnight without pushing for more, she felt the first stirrings of forgiveness. The following week was politically turbulent. Theron sent the promised communications explaining the situation and explicitly protecting Clearwater's neutrality. Cade issued a formal apology that everyone recognized as politically motivated rather than genuine. And the ballroom scene became the subject of intense gossip throughout the territories, with different packs interpreting the events in different ways depending on their existing relationships with Theron and Cade. Through it all, Theron proved himself to Lyra through consistent, respectful behavior. He visited her daily, always asking permission rather than assuming access. He included her in discussions about how to handle the political fallout. He introduced her to his inner circle and made it clear she was welcome whether she ultimately accepted the mate bond or not. And slowly, Lyra's anger faded, replaced by appreciation for a mate who was proving through actions that he respected her agency, even when instinct and politics made that difficult. 3 weeks after the ball, Lyra accepted the mate bond formally. The ceremony was private, witnessed only by Theron's Beta and Lyra's Alpha, with the public announcement coming afterward. And when Theron marked her as his mate, when the bond sealed fully and permanently, Lyra knew she had made the right choice, despite the dramatic beginning. She danced with his rival at the ball, and the Alpha King stormed the floor and claimed her. But the claiming was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of learning to navigate mate bonds and politics and trust, of proving that even relationships that start with jealousy and public scenes can become partnerships built on respect and genuine care. What did you think of Theron's jealous claim? Have you ever had someone fight for you in a way that was dramatic but ultimately showed how much they cared? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love this story of the Alpha King who could not control his possessiveness and the mate who demanded better treatment, hit subscribe and join our pack. New stories drop every week, celebrating wolves who make mistakes but prove themselves through actions, mates who stand up for their own agency, and the messy reality of love that starts with jealousy but grows into something deeper. Remember, claiming someone publicly is dramatic, but respecting their choices afterward is what actually matters.